Hey, what's going on? This is Davidson, and I'm super excited to share with you, to introduce to you Jordan Katz on my team. He is one of the top LinkedIn Learning account executives, and really excited to pick his brain and share best practices on what makes him so great and why he's excelling in his role.
Yeah,
Yeah,
excited to be here, Davidson.
yeah, thanks for doing this. Yeah, so I feel like sitting next to you, I always learn a lot. I think like when you sit next to anyone, you kind of like pick up some things. I would definitely credit you with a lot of like the word like a lot of what's that called, the word track
Talk track.
the talk track like on my sales calls. So I think what really stands out to me is like I feel like you're like all around, like you're the most like well-rounded sales professional, like at least on the SMB side, for sure. And would love to pick your brain on like I think there's like I'm sure there's a lot of things that have contributed to your success, but at a high level, like what do you think are some of those things that has made you so successful?
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like for me, like so much of the S&B role specifically comes down to honestly like the details. So like I think the number one thing about this role is like time management.
Yeah.
Of I have 900 accounts in my book. There's a million new people I could be reaching out to each and every day. Making sure that, upfront I'm prioritizing where it makes sense to spend my time. I'm spending a good amount of time prospecting, going after new business, as well as working with the clients that I already have, and getting those deals farther along. But always making sure that like, especially between like 9 to 5, like everything I do is like focused on like selling activities and making the best use of that time.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think especially in our business is a lot more prospecting compared to maybe the enterprise space or mid-market reps.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so on that, I know like the BLP program was like a big part of your development. What are like a couple takeaways that you've learned like holistically from that program that you helped carry on to this role?
Yeah, so that program was, my door into LinkedIn, and I think has definitely played a huge role in helping me like excel in this role. So as part of the BLP program, we spend 3 months in a recruiting role, actually hiring and sourcing candidates for LinkedIn, and another 3 months in a customer service role. And I think they've actually both played a pretty big part in helping me prepare to be an SD and then eventually now an AE at LinkedIn. So firstly, like the customer service piece, I think for me, it was super helpful to get an understanding of how do customers actually use LinkedIn services? What are some of the pain points there? What does LinkedIn do really well? And what are some areas that we struggle on? And particularly on the customer service piece, a lot of the times we were dealing with upset customers who were having issues with LinkedIn Recruiter, for example. I think
Uh,
for me, kind of taught me how to deal with a lot of those difficult situations, have
mhm.
tough conversations, and ultimately find a resolution. And I think that
uh,
translates well to this role. And then the recruiting piece of that, I think, honestly, like sourcing and hiring for LinkedIn is very similar to um, sourcing prospects for LinkedIn Learning now.
uh,
So finding good candidates for roles, sending them personalized messages, getting them on the
mm.
phone, and ultimately into that hiring funnel kind of mimics very closely what the prospecting process looks like.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like the secret sauce is to have like some personalization, but not too much where you're spending like way too much time like personalizing. Like, where do you find that delicate balance where it's still personalized enough, but not too much where you're not getting that volume that is necessary for SMB?
So that's a good question. And honestly, I think a lot of it goes back to like working smart and working hard. And because I think both are equally important in this role.
Yeah.
Of I'd say honestly, of the prospecting emails I send, probably 60 to 70% of them are personalized at this point. I feel like I have a pretty good sense of where I need to be reaching out and what it takes to get in the door there.
Hmm.
So like one thing I'm always focused on is how can I make my outreach as personal as possible? Why take a meeting with me over the other hundreds of sales reps that are reaching out to these senior leaders at these companies? Um, and kind of matching that up with the volume piece of, at the end of the day, most of my emails are going to follow like fairly similar templates, but even adding one or two sentences in, personalizing that note goes a really long way.
Mm. Okay. Thanks for sharing. And I do think not only do you're pretty good at time management, or you do have a good balance of prioritizing and putting in the effort. That's half the battle. But I feel like you also have like a pretty good mindset. Like you're pretty like even keeled for the most part. Like yeah, I don't really see you like celebrating like crazy over like small wins or things like that. But at the same time, like you don't really get frazzled. It doesn't seem like you get frazzled when you lose a deal and things like that.
Yeah. So I'd say one big thing for me in sales and honestly like in life is like trying to take emotion out of the sales process, never getting too high, never getting too low, always kind of like riding that middle path. And I think for me in this role, it's, definitely celebrate the highs, they are few and far between. There tends to be
Mm-hmm.
a lot of lows in this role, and like never getting too emotionally involved in a deal, I think lets me kind of play that middle path. And at the end of the day, like compartmentalize that. Yes, I'm very passionate about what I do. I love what I do, but at the end of the day, it's still a job, and I'm never going to let that affect the rest of my life.
That's interesting. I mean, I feel like we can talk a lot about just that. Like, I feel like in theory, like I think conceptually, like we get it, but I think it's harder to actually not let it affect like your well-being or even like your self-worth, right? Especially because like you are, relatively young like in your career, right? Like there's a lot more years left. So how do you get to the point where you don't really let it affect like, your weekends or your nights and things like that?
I mean, I think it's easier said than done, and nor
Yeah.
do I think I'm necessarily an expert there.
Hmm.
But like little things. So like for example, like I don't get Outlook or Teams notifications on my phone.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
I can
Hmm.
look them up like proactively if I need to. Like if I'm waiting on a deal,
Uh,
like I can check Teams on my phone, but I'm not
okay.
getting pushed any notifications. So that
Oh,
way, like when I'm
smart.
outside the office, like I am not like actively thinking about all of my
Ah,
deals.
that's smart.
And I
Okay.
think like also like big picture in this role, like 99.9% of any emails, questions, follow-ups that we get, like in the evening,
Hmm.
on the weekends, can realistically wait till 8 a.m. the next morning.
Okay.
And obviously if there's, a fire that I need to put out, like I'm gonna be on that. But
Right.
beyond that, of stepping away from it,
Hmm.
going home, going to the gym, having dinner, and like not actively be still thinking about that deal from that day.
That's really smart. It sounds like you set like really good boundaries where it's like, all right, if from 6 o'clock beyond, like there's no way I'm checking because like even if it's just a few minutes every hour, like over the course of like the weekend, like maybe that's like that's a lot of time, right? So
100%. And I think a lot of that comes down to focus. Like when I am like in the office, like you sit next to me every day, like I'm go, go,
yeah,
go. Like
right.
I'm trying my best, like never to be wasting time. Like if I'm not on a call with somebody, I'm sending a follow-up email. I'm updating
Yeah,
my forecast. I'm prospecting. I'm doing something. But
yeah.
when I leave the office, I want to be able to shut that computer and like turn
Mm.
off as much as I can.
That's awesome. Were you always like that, or do you like? I feel like that. I'm sure that takes time to like develop that practice.
To some degree, I feel like I've always had it. I feel like I'm good at like compartmentalizing like what I want to focus on and where I want to spend my energy. So like
Mm.
40 hours a week, 9 to 5 every day, like I'm going to be like laser focused on this job. And it's something that I am very passionate about and care deeply about. But that being said, I have a lot of other passions in life as well. And this is not the only one.
Mm.
So I want to be able to kind of give this the energy it deserves, but then focus other energy outside of day to day like job as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it does sound like you have a pretty well balanced life. Like a life outside of sales, right?
Hmm.
If you don't mind sharing, like what are some of those passions? It'd be good to because I do think it's important for salespeople to realize that it doesn't have to be your life, right? Like there is because I do think that this is a pretty big generalization, but a lot of like top salespeople I know, like it's like their life. Like it's like, like they're in at 7, sometimes they don't leave to 8 or 9, right? Like I think more in like some other companies, LinkedIn's like pretty good about that. But I know a ton of salespeople that's like, it's like they eat, like that's all they do, it seems like.
Yeah. And I think that actually makes me think of something that like Mike Gamson, who used to be the SVP of sales at LinkedIn, now CEO of Relativity, used to always say, is that like a lot of people think of like work-life balance, and he always used to call it work-life harmony. that like the
Mm.
two are allowed to intersect. Like you can bring like, especially at LinkedIn, like I've had my parents for lunch here, and vice versa. Like with my LinkedIn like teammates and like good friends, like I'm very comfortable like integrating that into my life, but kind of separating the two of like, hey, like even if I'm outside of the office and I'm hanging out with a friend from LinkedIn, like we don't need to be talking about work.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and I guess like to loop back to your other question, like passions, like for me, like love traveling. I've been to over 40 countries, and like I think like in my free time, like I love exploring new cultures, finding new places. I never like to go to the same place twice,
Mm.
and really just seeing the world. Um, I've lived in a bunch of different cities, as you know,
Right.
kind of always like moving to like the next place, next challenge.
Mm.
On top of that, love to find ways to give back to the community. I've been involved in like a bunch of different charitable initiatives. Build On is something I know we're both passionate about. Building
Mm.
schools in third world countries, some villages that are most in need, as
Mm.
well as like grew up my whole life volunteering for Meals on Wheels, and just like
Mm.
finding different ways to give back. I'm certainly grateful for everything we have here at LinkedIn, but want to like our vision of creating economic opportunity for the global workforce and like finding ways to like spread that out through my own life as well.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like talking to you, it seems like do you have a lot of like mentors? Because like it feels like you just not I wouldn't say like the whole package because no one's like perfect, but it does seem like you have good mindset, like you're doing all the right things. Like, would you say there are like some people, like certain people in your life that has like helped guided you in this, sort of this harmonious, like, being really good at your work, but then also like the community and everything like that?
Um, Absolutely. Like I think finding mentors, like both like when I was in school at the University of Michigan, and then like honestly, like within LinkedIn, ever since I graduated, I feel like there's been probably anywhere from like 5 to 10 people that I've really like latched onto.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be that we shared a passion for something, or we were both really driven in a certain area, that I really leaned on. Also, like my parents, like I think they instilled like the work ethic in me from like a really really young age.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas my dad is kind of like super driven like me. I think that's where the drive comes from.
Ah,
And my mom tends to be like very very even keeled, and which is where
okay.
like the
Hmm.
slow down and like steadiness comes from. So I think like that combo has been
Ah,
really great. And
yeah.
I think like when I'm thinking about like who can I like go talk to about a certain problem, like I have different people in my life that I'm going to go
Hmm.
to with specific questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember like meeting your parents, and I remember like your dad was just like this gregarious, like energetic dude. And I'm like, huh, like I could see that because like you're also very passionate about a lot of things, like Build On and LinkedIn Learning, obviously. And then yeah, your mom was definitely like more low key, like she's like I feel like she's like very zen, like
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty cool,
And I think
huh?
like having the balance of the two like pays off, because like if we're looping this back to sales, like anytime I'm meeting with somebody, I always want to match their energy. Like if
Mm,
they're super fired up, bubbly, like I'm going to be super fired up and bubbly. If
mm,
they're very laid back, like that's something I'm going to focus on, and try to be a little bit more laid back. I don't want to be
mm,
super in their face. And
yeah.
kind of matching people's energy, I feel like goes really well, and helps in this role a ton.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. I remember like even our manager KP like gave me feedback where we did like a mock role play. It was like the first month I was here, and she's like, "Yeah, you're way too excited. Like like you're supposed to match like how I was." I was like, "Oh yeah." So it's something that I think I'm getting better at, but it's like with coaching from KP, like I'm getting better
Yeah.
at it.
And I think that that goes a long way, because just being able to match companies where they're at, like
Yeah. Mm.
even as little, and like I'm very type A, very big like detail orientation type person. And like even as granular as like the types of emails people send, like
Mm.
working in the L&D space, some people are like very direct to the point. Some people use 12 exclamation points in their emails. Making sure that like I'm communicating at the same
Mm.
level they are goes a long way.
Uh,
And I think honestly builds comfort a lot quicker. If I
uh,
can kind of mirror their communication style, that's just going to make
mm.
working with me a lot easier from their perspective.
And who taught you that, or is that kind of learned throughout just experiences?
I think honestly couldn't tell you. I think How to Win Friends and Influence People
Mm.
was a book I read a couple years ago, and honestly I probably read every 2 years, because I think it's just
Ah,
so relevant, not just to sales, but to life. I think that's a concept from there, as well as just like some psychology classes back in college that, hey, the more you can mirror somebody's personality, the more easily you're going to connect.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I feel like you're pretty good. Like I feel like I always see you like meeting with a lot of people for like breakfast and stuff like that. And yeah, I feel like you're kind of like you're very like adaptive. Like you're able to like connect with anyone, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's certainly about like a really cool skill that you
Thank you. I like to think so.
have.
Something
Yeah.
I work towards for sure.
And yeah, I know that, obviously you're crushing it in sales, but from our like conversations in the past, like it seemed like you love like just helping people out and giving and like kind of being like a mentor or kind of being like a manager where you're helping people reach their goals. Like what are some of your like long-term goals? I know that, you're super ambitious, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see like, what that looks like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point, like my favorite thing in the world is mentoring and coaching.
Hmm.
Short term, like would love to, hopefully work my way up through the sales organization here into like a management role. And for that exact reason is that at the end of the day, like, sure, who doesn't love the feeling of like closing a big deal? But like for me, to some extent, when my teammates close a big deal that I helped collaborate on almost means more to me. So I think like that side of it of like sales management, coaching, mentoring is someplace where I'd like to go. That being said, like I'm less than a year into a full cycle sales role, and I'm pretty cognizant of that I still
Right.
have a ton to learn. So making sure that I'm walking before I'm running.
Mm.
I'd love to spend at least another 3-4 years as an individual contributor learning the ropes before ever getting into a management role, because I feel like right now I wouldn't be prepared for that.
Right.
And then long term, whether that be my own venture, I think entrepreneurship's always been a pretty big part of my life. Even back in
Ah.
college, had a couple
Hmm.
companies I was involved with. Nothing major, but I think that was something that I really enjoyed. Like even pitching in like the University of Michigan, like small business competitions
Hmm.
was a lot of fun and something that
Ah.
I'd love to loop back to at some point. I don't know when, I don't know how, but at some
Hmm.
point I think I'd like to have my own venture to some degree.
Ah. Yeah, I could see that, and it goes back to being a mentor, being a coach, right? Because if you obviously when you're in your company, like you're really impacting and coaching, developing all of your employees, right? So that does make sense. Huh?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, just a couple more questions. Like I'm like one of the things that like I guess like I enjoy about you is like you're just like high motor like a lot, right? Like you're able to like work really hard for like the full 8 hours, it seems like how are you able to like do you plan out like your goals, like how does all that work?
So firstly, a lot of coffee, I think helps a lot. Um, but in all seriousness, I do think it comes down to goal setting, and like I am like religious about how I like block out my calendar every day.
Yeah.
I'm big, like my entire calendar is color coded. I know what types of meetings I'm going into like back to back, because oftentimes in this role, just having such a large book of business, like I can really be on the phone for 8 hours a day, and like that's not that crazy.
Right.
Um, so making sure like going into the week that I have a high level plan for the week of, hey,
uh,
if I am back to back on calls Monday, Tuesday, that I'm not gonna prioritize prospecting Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because now I have more time.
uh,
And especially like the night before, like if it's Monday night and I look at my calendar on Tuesday and I know I'm back to back all day, making sure that I've already prepped and thought about every single one of those meetings.
hmm.
Any decks I'm gonna need, like I have those prepped and ready to go.
Yeah.
As well as anybody I'm collaborating with at any of those meetings, which is like pretty common here, that I've
Right.
touched base with them if I need to. And then finally, like I'm also like, I don't even know why, but I've always been big on handwriting. I feel like it's how I remember stuff a lot better. So I
Hmm.
like take handwritten notes for every single meeting. And
Oh.
so like something
Huh.
super small that I do is like before I go into like a day, like I'm gonna have notes for every meeting I have on the calendar and like
Oh.
the 2 or 3 things I want to cover in every one of those meetings. And I think that helps me stay really, really on focus for those meetings, set the
Hmm.
right agenda. Whereas I feel like if I didn't do that, like going back to back, like I would have no idea. Like it would take me too long to like get into the mindset for that meeting.
Huh. Interesting. So do you also do that? So it'd be like for your Monday night, like do you do it on Friday or do you do that on Sunday to like prep for your Monday meetings?
Usually Sunday. And to be
Ah,
honest, like if I don't have any early meetings on Monday, I'll probably do it Monday morning. So I'd say
okay.
it like fluctuates, but like honestly, I'd say just being really deliberate about everything
Mm,
I do in this role. And I don't like wasting time.
yeah.
I in a
Mm,
sales role, like obviously small talk is important, and like depending on who I'm meeting with, like I think it's something that I, you know, plays bigger roles in different conversations.
mm,
But I tend to be very direct and to the point, and I
ah,
think customers appreciate that.
right.
And always using like I think it's a big LinkedIn thing, but like opening up a meeting of like this meeting will be successful if we do X, Y, and Z,
Mm-hmm.
modifying that for customers, obviously, but making
Mm,
sure that we set clear expectations at the beginning of the call,
yeah.
meet them during the call, and then close the call to make sure that we met them. And anything that we might have missed, that we're getting clear next steps on the calendar, who owns what. I don't do
Mm,
well in gray space. Like I
ah,
tend to write emails with like very specific to-dos for specific people.
mm,
So that way it's very clear on like ownership of who's going to own what from here, what do I own, and what do timelines look like.
ah. That's awesome. And did you learn that from when you were shadowing top reps as a sales development partner? Like, how did you learn all
A little bit. I think over time, like I've been at LinkedIn 2.5 years now, I feel like you get a sense of who runs meetings the way I want to run meetings,
that? Right.
and how many meetings have I sat in that have been a complete waste of 30
Uh,
minutes,
okay.
and just kind of picking up things over time that I've like latched onto. And I think
Hmm.
it just, for me, like I need to have like a game plan going in. I can't go on cold and be on the game. So I'd say like
Right.
preparation is the name of the game. Of
Yeah.
I can't always like I'm usually not the smartest person in the room, but if I can be the most prepared person in the room, that's gonna give me an edge.
Mm. So walk me through like how you prepare for meetings, like typically, like do you do any research on their end? Like how do you come up with your agendas usually?
Yeah. So like first things like are you talking about like a client meeting or like
Yeah,
internal meetings as
prospect
well?
meeting.
So assuming I'm meeting with a prospect, like I'm always gonna try to do like at least 5-10 minutes of research, like at a dead minimum,
Yeah.
depending on the account, the individual I'm meeting with, like maybe some more. Um, so first things first, like I'm always gonna go check our internal CRM to make sure that I know any outreach or communication that like we've had with that person and that company in the past, whether it's specifically LinkedIn Learning or LinkedIn as a whole. I think being knowledgeable and knowing who they've talked to, knowing when that conversation was, goes a long way. And it also helps build rapport that I've actually done my homework. I'm not coming
Mm.
in cold to this conversation.
Right.
From there, I'm gonna look at their LinkedIn profile. Hopefully, they have some stuff on there that what they're passionate about, what
Mm.
their goals are, what they do day to day. If so, that's gonna help answer a lot of my questions and maybe save us some time later on. Like even this
Mm.
morning, I met with a VP of HR at a startup, and she had her entire job responsibility on her LinkedIn profile. So instead
Right.
of asking her that outright, I was able to be very targeted with my question and
Mm.
say, "Hey, I see that this is like a piece you focus on. I'd actually like to talk about that."
Mm.
And she was like, "Great." And I think she enjoyed that I'd done my homework and wasn't coming in cold.
Ah, I see. That's awesome. Yeah. So because of that, because like going back to your point in preparation, because you're so prepared, it's like, and it's still deliberate, right? All your questions, like it's adding to the conversation. Is it moving it forward, right? It's not just like conversation just to say something. It's like, okay, like this is actually like adding to our whatever our shared goals are,
Hmm.
right?
Exactly. And I think like, especially thinking about like new client meetings, like the more value you can add up front, the more bought in that prospect or that client's going to be. And so like I'll open up every conversation, I'll introduce myself, I'll introduce like what I do and like where I partner with organizations and kind of set expectations up front. So that way we're kind of on the same page early on, and just to make sure that, you know, it's going to be valuable time for me as well as the person I'm talking to on the other side of the phone.
Right. So, and do you think like, so it sounds like, but you're still like adaptive to the point where like, what if someone is like, a little bit more chatty and kind of like, we'll talk about like, what, like, it sounds like you're still adaptive, but that you're like, you understand that you're like, okay, maybe I need to talk a little bit more about like what's going on before I get straight into business.
Absolutely. And I think it's a matter of feeling out different conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Like I, you know, naturally, like I'm a pretty introverted person. Like
Ah,
I don't like my natural inclination is not just to like share a ton about my life. It's really more so to ask questions, to learn, to be a listener rather than a
Mm.
talker. So yeah, if we want to get into small talk, like absolutely, I think building relationships is the most important thing. I do find that like from time to time, like especially with like a new meeting with somebody I've never met with before, I
Yeah.
do want to set expectations up front before getting into like more of like a truly rapport building conversation, because oftentimes like I've learned that senior executives actually don't like that,
Right.
where they don't want to make small talk for 10 minutes if they have absolutely no idea who I am.
Right, right. Yeah, like especially like CFOs and COOs are and CEOs who are like ultimate decision makers, right? Especially for us. So
Yeah, and the more value I can provide up front, like I've kind of earned the right to the rest of that conversation is how I look at it.
hmm. Okay. Well, yeah, I feel like we touched upon a lot of things. Yeah, I think overall like this was a very like insightful conversation. I know like I got a lot from it and I sit next to you, so like I feel like this is like very valuable. Yeah, are there any like or I guess the last question I have is like, do you have any tips for any like people who might be interested in transitioning into more like a quota carrying role who is more interested? Because I do get a lot of people that reach out to me that's like, hey, like I'm actually interested in potentially whether it's like they come from being an accountant or whatever it is, like that does come up a lot.
Yeah. So first things first, I'd say feel it out. Like regardless of what type of role you're trying to go into, especially if it's a sales role, like find somebody in that space who's already doing that job and ask to shadow them for a day. Ask to jump on a few of their meetings, like to the extent it's realistic. Because first things first, I'd say with the sales role, like it is stressful. Like we carry a number constantly, and like even if I blow out this quarter, I'm starting from zero next quarter. And I'd say
Right.
there's so many highs and lows of this job. Like make sure that it's something that you actually want to commit to before diving in. I think a lot of people with
Mm.
sales, they see the OTE, they see dollar signs, and they don't really
Yeah.
think about the work that goes into that.
Yeah.
So I think like internalize that, and that like it is a stressful job and that
Yeah.
it's not for everybody. And even me long term, like I don't know how long like sales is like the forever goal.
Right.
Um, as far as like specific advice, like I'd say have like as simple as it sounds, just like have a plan. Like
Mm.
when you go and like sit down and like actually like write down your goals. Like
Yeah.
what do I want to accomplish this year and how am I going to do it, and get as granular with those as you possibly can. And
Mm.
then even taking that down to like weekly, daily, and like how we're going to attack each day. Because I think like a lot of sales, like you can find yourself just sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah.
And at least in our role, like there's a million things you can be doing at any given time. And so I
Yeah.
think like the more clear you are with yourself and maybe with your
Mm.
manager, for example, of setting goals,
Yeah.
makes that a lot easier to then like go attack them. So that's why it's like if I have 30 minutes free in my day, I'm not sitting there like, what should I do? I already know what I'm
Right.
going to do. I can just do it.
Right. Right. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of good takeaways from it. To recap, I think time management is huge, prioritization, being adaptive to different like personality profiles, being clear on your agenda and setting expectations up front so they know like what to expect from this meeting, making good use of their times, especially executives. I mean, everyone's busy, right? But especially like the C-suite. So just and then also being like deliberate and intentional with like your planning, when it comes to hitting your goals and your numbers and all that stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. You hit the nail on the head.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Jordan. I appreciate you doing this.
My pleasure, Davidson.